Hello, I'm Bob Gorley, the Chief Technology Officer of OODA LLC. This recording captures content from our 18 October 2022 OODAcon. OODAcon was an event designed to bring together people from our community to talk about this age of exponential innovation and disruption so we can all learn how to better survive and thrive. This session was on 20 years of cyber threat intelligence. It features Jen Havermann of the NSA and Matt Devost, a pioneer in cyber threat intelligence.
So Jen, thank you for joining us. I'll talk a little bit about this panel first. Wanted to cover the topic of cyber threat, in particular cyber threat intelligence, and I caught myself in my own bias. I've been involved in this industry for a while, helped start the first cyber threat intelligence company, create the first product, was COO at iSight. Tom Parker and I acquired iDefense when we were at Accenture. And when I look back at the conversations that we've been having on this over the years at Fed Cyber, it was particularly one-sided, private sector focused. So I decided to shift the attention entirely to you in your government capacity. So first off, if you would just I always hate trying to provide bios for folks that work over at NSA. So would you just kind of give us your experience in this space and your official bio?
Sure. So we'll go official and unofficial because I think that's important because the title talks about the last 20 years. And so I haven't been at NSA the last 20 years. I started in the community 34 years ago, and I worked at NSA first, predating threat intelligence in that way, and then went out to industry, went back into government for a short stint when I was at U.S. Department of Education as their chief of cybersecurity operations, went back out to industry again, and now I'm back at NSA last 4 years.
Excellent. And your role at NSA over the past 4 years?
So I too cannot keep a job. I'm also one of those. So I started back there as a subject matter expert, supporting their tradecraft organization, really focused on all things legal policy, oversight, and compliance, and getting our data shared, getting it out and shareable and usable. So we can have the data, but if it's not shared, it doesn't matter. And then I moved over to be the technical director of NCSOC, which some people may remember as NTOC. They renamed it. And then just recently, I saw a super cool job being the Chief Operations Officer for the NCR Cyber Command. So what NCRs do, if you're not familiar with them, they're NSA CSS representative to the command. So we support them in their needs. We bring the unique things that we do to the command to help them with their mission.
Excellent. So recognizing the in and out of government, but the adjacencies with the space and some of the roles that you've played in organizations like AFCEA, how would you describe the past 20 years from a cyber threat intelligence perspective and how the field has matured?
Well, it's better now. It's better now than it ever was. Because I remember, I guess this is, and 20 years wasn't that long ago. It's like 2002. It doesn't seem like 20 years ago, but I'm thinking back in the 80s is 20 years ago, but no, that's not the case. So when I remember the first time I ever got productized threat intelligence was from iSight. Nice product. I had about 3 analysts, and we had nothing to put it into. So it was a fantastic solution, but there was no infrastructure to support it. And if you're a small FedCiv agency with a small team, it falls on the ground. So that was, as late as 2010. Rolling forward, I don't work with it directly, but I've seen so many improvements of the products and the services that are out there that are available. It's almost, I think, hard for anyone in government to choose because I heard someone earlier say something to the effect that the government will do that, the contractors, they just want to make money. I think it's hard to figure out what to purchase because they'll look at, well, where does this come from? What do the machine learning models look like? What sources do they have? They really want to kick the tires. And so even though we've made so many advancements, I still see that tire kicking happening in the community.
Interesting. So you mentioned getting the cyber threat intelligence and not being able to action it because you couldn't disseminate it. How were you able to develop strategies to communicate the risks articulated in that reporting to leadership?
So back then I didn't.
You didn't.
And
You just
and
fell
that
through.
was the shame of it. We didn't because, I think anyone who's ever walked in somewhere, either like a sysadmin or a cyber person, you inherit what was there before you. And so you also inherit old documentation. You inherit some really interesting configurations, some things that's like, I never would have done that. So I inherited some of those things. And so it was, I think, more focus of digging out of technical debt and trying to get good situational awareness of what we had to even be able to apply anything like that was just way beyond our capability at the time. So we were getting it in. It was filling my mailbox, but we weren't able to keep up with it because you have, I've also ran an incident response team, and so we were busy with just responding and keeping the lights on, trying to keep the place together. And so it's very unfortunate, but yeah, we weren't in a place to receive it.
I know that Lou liked my quotes. One that I almost put up there and didn't put up was, "There's no such thing as too much information overload, only filter failure." And it sounds like that was a Clay Shirky quote. Sounds like that was the situation that you were dealing with,
Yes.
or that we consistently deal with. So outside of the cyber threat intelligence space, what strategies are you using, and thinking of this room as kind of one of the platforms for that, around educating leadership around the cyber risk? And I'll note that in the investor discussion, as much as I loved it in some of our earlier discussions, no one was saying, oh, and we're going to make the investment to secure this platform, or we're going to make sure that this is robust and it's resilient. It was all about, similar to what I talked about this morning, capturing the opportunity space, but ignoring the cybersecurity component to it. So what strategies are effective for you in communicating that risk?
Great question. So I will say I did like what Don said earlier about don't make your leaders speak French, because I've had a lot of leaders that don't speak any French at all. And so I think really for me, it's been about the messaging and how do I craft the message in the right way. So also attributing this back to Don, thank you for this because this resonated quite a bit, is you can't just be a systems engineer. You're thinking that way, but you also have to figure out how to shape into the business world and how to convince them. And so you need to speak in ways of things that they care about. So if the IG is coming to do an inspection, that gets a lot of attention. So you can leverage that. It depends on the leader, but usually a bottom line up front, very clear. And it can't be what I care about, it has to be what they care about. So I need to really reflect on that and get the messaging correct.
Do you find that you have to make the messaging unique to the leader? Do they care about different things?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No one leader that I work for is the same.
Interesting. Yeah, I've mentioned that. I won't share the story here, but happy to share it over a whiskey later. My challenge is getting the head of SOCOM to change his one character combat ready password, right? And it was about finding useful analogies and, again, not speaking French to make sure that they understood and could contextualize the risk is definitely important. Taking the approach of kind of focusing forward, and I'd like to ask this as two separate questions. What should the public sector be focusing on from a cyber threat intelligence perspective over the next 10 years?
Also a good question. So having been in and out, let's see, public sector.
Or you could answer for the private sector
first. So I think probably that filtering piece, I know some of that is done. Some of the hard work has been done over the last 20 years. Taxonomy, speaking the same language, standardization, right? So if I say that this is an IOC, that makes sense to you because you're receiving that and you get it because we speak end to end the same language. I still think there's a lot of volume. So how do we whittle down the volume? How do we get the filtering done such that we're getting information to people where it matters to them? because we just have information overload. More is not necessarily better.
And how about from the private sector perspective? What would you like to see that community achieve over the next 10 years?
Probably the same. However, I was thinking about this earlier and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we had a way, because a lot of the, at least the defense industrial base, some of the intelligence community agencies, they work on closed networks. So they don't necessarily want tools to come in to survey the networks, or that's kind of not something they welcome. So is there a way to be able to have that capability inserted into a closed network such that you're getting the survey and you're getting maybe customizing the filters for that particular network or networks, that enterprise, which is a lot.
Okay. We've heard a couple different thematics today during multiple sessions around friction in the bureaucracy getting in the way. Are there any, I'd love your perspective on there. Are there any lessons there, or are there elements where we should be doing things at an increased speed? And an example that comes to mind is some research by someone who I've mentored over the past several years, where they looked at, it was Kristen Del Rosso at Sophos, gave a keynote on looking at the Chinese disclosure of vulnerabilities versus the US disclosure, and that you could actually get a leading indicator of things that were going to be vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed from a private sector perspective, weeks, if not months in advance, because of the reduced bureaucracy associated with that. So do you think that we have friction issues with regards to cyber threat intelligence, especially stuff that's kind of going to flow into the public domain via CVEs, et cetera?
The way you described it between us and China, so I don't know that it's friction necessarily. So I think we, as Americans, care about privacy, and we have to balance that. And so we have rules. We put these things in place for a reason. So we're not going to be as, like, China will just do what China wants to do. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. And if it's not okay, that's too bad because you live in China. But here we have to respect that balance. And so it's always going to be, I think, more difficult for us. I don't know that it's friction, but perhaps understanding, and I'm not sure exactly how to get around that yet.
Great.
Give me a few years.
Give you a few years.
Yeah.
Counting on you. That's your homework.
Okay.
We'll give everybody homework coming out of the event. What's an uncomfortable truth around cyber risk?
Ooh, there are a couple. I wrote these down because I was ready for this one. So I don't think that we invest enough resources to buy it down financially. And people-wise, right? Any of those resources. I don't think everyone knows what is important to them as far as, like, what is critical in their enterprise, especially about their information and why they have it and where they have it and what they do with it. And then, of course, too, I think, and this sounds military or government-ish, but I think it needs to happen in private sector as well, is we don't necessarily exercise the events, like potential events and preparedness, as we should. That's always like a thing that gets, back burner, or we do it quarterly, or we kind of go through the motions, and we don't really think about how would an adversary go after us? How would they do that? And really kind of create something for our entity that makes sense. You can't just cookie cutter it.
Yeah. Jay Haley had the great quote, decades ago now, I guess, that the adversary is not a 1 or a 0. And of course, at Fusion X, we have that same perspective that the adversary gets a vote, right? You have to be looking at it from the perspective of the goals that they're trying to accomplish and how they view networks. So how do you think the adversary views us today? Like, what's something that they understand about us that maybe we don't understand about ourselves, playing to this concept, that we talked about earlier in the day, around big data and being known, by Amazon better than we know ourselves? What does the adversary, and I'll just use it in a general context, know about us that we don't recognize in ourselves?
I'd say some of us recognize it, maybe not all of us recognize it, but I think the adversary recognizes us as sharers of information. We love to overshare. Not all of us, mind you, but we tend to overshare and put things out there that the adversary may not necessarily put out there. As far as and so in those terms, I'm thinking about like operational security, things that your employees would post out there that they may not even think provides the adversary an advantage.
So I think we introduce vulnerability just through this.
Oh, absolutely.
This willingness to share.
Yes.
So definitely, the relatable from the personal perspective. Maybe I'm oversharing on Facebook. Although I do love people telling me how much they enjoyed seeing my son and I traveling for hockey. Over the course of the day. Is there a corporate equivalent to that? What's the corporate equivalent to oversharing?
Oh gosh, the corporate equivalent. Probably putting information out about maybe some of the work that you're doing, sometimes potentially the customers, details about specific technologies that you're working on. That's hard though, because you're corporate, and the balance of that, having been, so I was also on the dark side. I also worked in business development. So
Not the dark side I was anticipating.
Right, exactly. And so you're wanting to put information out there, but it is a balance, right? And getting that balance right is so critical.
Interesting. So do you think that kind of counters the narrative that we see in the market over the past several years about increasing transparency at the corporate level? And we had conversations earlier today around college students making decisions around which schools to attend based on the ESG profile of the corporation. Of the corporation that they're going to go work for. How do we find that balance? Is there more value from transparency and the benefits afforded that, or does the risk overwhelm the value of transparency?
Another good question. He's killing me with these questions. So I think, again, it's about balance, right? So I heard the comment about the ESG, about, making sure they have an environmental program of interest, right? Does that employer have that? I think that's actually generational, a lot of it. And in fact, I'm seeing that at work. They want to see the employee resource groups. They want to know that we have opportunities to give back to the community. Less so other things about like paychecks and all of that. It's interesting. I mean, pay obviously is the key thing, but you see that more in the younger generation that's coming into the workforce now, and they want to work for good and reasonable leaders. And so developed quite a following so far. But balancing that, we sometimes lose some of the workforce because they don't understand it, or they don't have leaders that are explaining it to them and helping them look at their risk individually, if that makes sense. So some of our younger employees are not on social media at all. And then you find others that want that engagement. And so how do you help guide them to know where is their balance? Because the missions are different too. So you might find somebody on one side of the house or one particular mission, and it's very open. So our Cyber Collaboration Center, I don't know if you've heard about that, but we stood that up in 2019. I am not a part of it, but I am proud of it as a product. Morgan Adamski is the senior that runs that center. And they have really done well, I think, in public-private partnership with sharing information. They've had something, and I don't get to see Morgan because I'm always at work, but and she's always out presenting and out into the community. But she's talked about like something like 4,000 analytic exchanges between them and industry partners on threat information. Pretty cool. There are a lot of younger people who want to work in that center because it is open, because it looks more like a defense industrial base, like contractor facility where you have your cell phone close by, like you pop out of the skiff and those things are available to you. So their risk profile and what their, things that they put out there looks very different than somebody who's working in operations or somebody who's working in computer network operations, right? You may not see them at all.
Do you think that the failure to have profiles on social media introduces risks for some of this generation because they become an anomaly?
It's a little bit conspicuous, yeah. Again, it's about balance. I think I'm on just about every social media platform there is. But, I keep it to what it needs to be. Again, back to the balance, right? I think Facebook is about recipes, travel, and cats, right? As nature intended for the internet. My LinkedIn profile, it has job titles. It does not go into detail, right? But we have people who are not on there at all, and they are conspicuous in their absence, for sure.
You didn't mention TikTok. What do you use TikTok for?
I don't use TikTok at all. Nope.
That's the point, man.
That's the one I'm not on.
We've addressed over the years and today as well conversations around public-private sector cooperation. What do you think, having gone back and forth between industry, private sector, and government, in classified mission sets and also in things like Department of Education, what have been some of our more worthwhile accomplishments in public-private sector cooperation?
So what I just spoke about with the Cyber Collaboration Center, so that came up in 2019. Some of the comprehensive national cybersecurity initiative activities that happened probably a decade ago with like public-private partnership on cyber education. I think we still have work that we can do because cyber as a career field is ever evolving. The technology is ever evolving and the threats, so you have to keep up with it. So how do we continue to educate people? I think those are probably the two good ones.
Yeah, excellent. Do you think we're doing a better job? And NSA has been a bit of an anomaly because it's always been a little bit more accepting of what we'll call the technology or cybersecurity, eccentricities, the grooming standard, the T-shirts, etc. But that seems to be propagating throughout the government. So do you think that that's a positive trend and that it's helping us to recruit more talent into the public sector? And what would you amplify? What else would you do to convince people to come and work on the cybersecurity mission set in the U.S. government?
Also another good question. So I don't
only ask good questions.
I know, he's only asking the good ones, right? Bob asked some hard ones, so I'm glad you're the person asking me questions. So I don't think it's about what they necessarily wear, but I do think it is about the freedom to choose what they want to do, whether if they want to wear T-shirts to work, it can be fine. It depends really on the office and the work that they're doing. Similarly, I think I'm an interesting person to ask about this because I identify, I think, as a multi-potentialite. So I do not like boxes and being specific with you must be this and only this, and you're always that, right? Which I think happens. It's kind of a tendency to do that. So I think as we get closer to kind of tailoring some of these opportunities for people, I think we have more success. So, for instance, we have development programs for students. They come in after graduation, and they take 3 years, and they're different ones. There's one in operations, one in language. But in my last role as technical director, I was like, I'm going to take on some of these development students. And so instead of interviewing them in a traditional sense, I would do a panel, and I would bring them in. And I'm like, tell me about your interests. Tell me about what you want to do. What gets you excited about coming in? And we would shape a tour unique to that student. Every single development program person had a different looking tour based on what their interests were, how they wanted to develop their skill sets. And I think younger generation hiring in, I think that's more of what they're looking for. They want to be heard and they want to have, be cultivated and be able to train in their interest areas. I went back to government because I wanted the mission experience. I wanted to go back. So as a contractor, you're building houses that you don't live in, kind of, for defense industrial base. And I wanted to live in the house because I think that's where the complexity is. It's so interesting. It's a different perspective. I think, too, I would have, you have some challenges trying to sell into the government, talking to them about what they want. And I feel like if you've not been in there and experienced it, you're missing part of the perspective. The problem looks different to them.
Excellent. You've been here all day with us.
I have.
Thank you for that. How has this event shaped your perspective on the house that you live in?
Oh my gosh, Carl was absolutely right. And I need to read his book. And by the way, the Barnes & Noble does not have it, so that's a travesty. I would address that with them.
I'll give you my copy if you promise to bring it in the building and leave it there when you're done.
Okay. Yeah, I was talking to Matt earlier before we came up here, and I said I've taken copious amounts of notes, as I normally do when I attend these things. And I had recently read somewhere that like some of your weakest connections, the people that you spend the least amount of time with, they actually have, they can make a profound difference in the way you view things because they are seeing things from a completely different perspective, bringing you new information. And so, yes, that was all day here. I took down all kinds of notes and ideas of things to go back. And yeah, I have a list.
Yeah,
I have a list.
cool. I have one last question, and it's probably the most controversial. It's divided leadership in the U.S. government significantly, particularly over social media. In the cybersecurity space, pineapple on pizza, yes or no? Thank you for laughing.
Yes. I'm going to go with a yes. I mean, if that's the way you want to go, right? I'm all about
It's a define your own
customizing.
experience.
Yes,
Yeah, I love
define
that
your own
as the-
experience.
With the general.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Jen.
Thank
This
you.
was awesome. Thanks.